Hi! Why don't you rest your eyes for a few and enjoy a story? A story of vengeance.
This is The Maid of Wildenloh. Our tale takes place a few hundred years back, in a Wildenloh farmhouse that apparently still has remnants left of it today. The old well, the depression of the building, and pieces of wall remain. I should note, I do not know if these sites do in fact remain today, or if these are hundreds of years old references that Jürgen is translating. But hey, that's part of the fun, right? The farmhouse boasts a wild history concerning one family's maid. While the family was traveling to a wedding, the maid stayed behind to house sit. And while she remained there alone, the farm was besieged by bandits. These bandits were a family of 7 brothers from the community who knew the farm would be vacated and decided to take advantage of it. Seems you could accidentally tip burglars off on your family vacation even before the days of social media. Now the family and the maid had done their best to secure the place, so breaking in would be no easy task. The bandit brothers decided their best way to do it would be to dig a hole under a wall on the side of the house. This type of break-in isn't entirely subtle, however, and the maid heard the scuffling. The woman grabbed a sharp peat spade and settled herself by the wall where the bandits were digging. When the first brother poked his head in, she brought the spade down hard on his neck, edge first, decapitating the fellow. Hurriedly, she dragged the corpse inside. After a moment, the brothers outside called out, "Did you make it in all right?" The maid muffled her voice. "Yes." So it went with the next 5 brothers. You can imagine the literal bloodbath that was collecting. By the time the 7th brother was ready to poke his head in, he noticed the gore, and yoinked his head away at the last second. The maid did manage to nick his scalp, but the bandit was well enough to bandage his injury and head to a local wedding. He got pretty sauced up there, and at one point during the dancing he sang out, "Hey ho, the Maid of Wildenloh! Now she waits for the 7th man." A few years later, the maid found herself preparing for her own wedding day. A finely dressed gentleman had shown up to the farm, and announced his intentions of courting the maid. He provided some references, which panned out well, and so the maid accepted his proposal. And people say dating apps have killed romance. Back then you found a husband the same way you hire an administrative assistant. On the day of the wedding, the groom came to pick up the maid and get her situated at his home. He sent a gorgeous carriage to pick her up, and they rode off together, traveling for a few hours. The maid began to get suspicious. "Tell me," she said, "will we be arriving at your home soon?" "Relax," he replied. "Let me lay on your lap for a bit, so you can stroke my hair." The man reclined, and the maid ran her fingers through his hair. She immediately felt the groove in his skull, and pulled her hand back hastily. "Ah, it seems you've discovered my secret," her fiancé drawled. "I am the man you scalped that night, the man who lost all 6 brothers by your same hand. And tonight, I finally get my revenge." The carriage arrived at the bandit's home, which wasn't empty. His mother had joined them, eager to avenge her lost sons as well. She'd prepped a fire with a large cauldron of boiling oil. They'd also prepared a chopping block and a hatchet, where the maid was to be beheaded first. The maid lowered her eyes. "Please just make it quick. And if you would, could you help me remove my wedding dress? I would hate for such a beautiful thing to be soiled." The bandit allowed her this, and began releasing the buttons down her back. Moving quickly, the maid dashed forward and grabbed the hatchet. By the time the bandit realized what was happening, she'd already sliced through him, dropping him dead. His mother rushed forward with her own weapon, but the maid slipped her grasp, and the old woman ended up in the cauldron of oil. The maid jumped in the wagon and set the horses to gallop. As she rounded the corner of the farmhouse in Wildenloh, her old employer squinted his eyes at her, not believing what he saw. The maid stood up in her seat, blood splattered down her gown, waving. "Hey ho!" she sang out. "The Maid of Wildenloh has finally got the 7th man." The end.